So, hello everybody. My name is Andy Stirling, and welcome to the taster lecture for the sustainable development work that we do here at Sussex in a number of master's courses. I'm a long-standing denizen of an outfit called SPRU, the Science Policy Research Unit, and we work with a lot of colleagues across the campus at Sussex in delivering a range of courses around issues of sustainable development. And I want to give you a flavor of some of the key ideas and themes that crop up in that work. And I'll do so by using the title Transforming Sustainable Development, somewhat grand, but the idea behind that is that if we take sustainable development seriously, then it is a very transformative agenda indeed. And I want to try and give a flavor of quite how transformative that is. But at the same time, there are pressures, partly because of that, to minimize and divert what sustainable development really means. So there is a need also then, in order to realize that potential, to transform ideas of sustainable development themselves as they're playing out in mainstream policymaking. And that's my aim with this taster talk. So a good place to start really is, what is sustainable development? What's it all about? Of course, there are the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, and they cover a plethora of deep, intractable, really daunting, long-standing challenges, ranging through all kinds of parameters around environmental degradation, resource depletion, poverty, inequality, hunger around the world at intolerable levels, climate change, of course, but also ozone depletion and a range of other serious assaults on the environment from different kinds of technological side effects, water, provision of water, and then issues of racism, injustice, oppression, gender inequalities, and of course, war. This is the full range of issues that the Sustainable Development Goals and their 300 and something indicators are trying to get to grips with. And the slogan behind all that is leave no one behind. And that's really quite a radical, in a world as it is now, a radical agenda, I think you might agree. So much so that it threatens some really quite entrenched interests. The Economist, for instance, refers to the Sustainable Development Goals as the stupid development goals, preserving helpfully the acronym. And the reason for this, on the face of it, is because they are so plural. There are the 17 goals, they are the 170 metrics, there are 304, I think it is, indicators. And to that kind of mindset, it's ridiculously too multiple. We need just one simple thing if we're going to lead change in the kind of ways that entrenched interest in big business, in government, in global agencies, in large NGOs think is the way to do things. In other words, we need to have a clear way forward, to use that ubiquitous phrase in politics around the world, where these deeply entrenched structures, and I'm not labeling people here, just speaking of the structures that exist in the world, the political and economic structures of power and privilege that benefit as things stand from the way things are, structures of patriarchy, of coloniality, of modernity in its present forms, are restricting and seeking to restrict the way we think about politics to a kind of controlling imagination of the way forward. How often do we hear that phrase in politics, the way forward, as if we all agree what the way forward is, and it's independent of which way we happen to be facing. And so as a result then, and of course I'm not in saying this intending to denigrate the importance of economic factors, private profit, gross domestic product, economic growth, but in the real world as it stands, the way forward in so many settings, in so many debates about urbanization, globalization, the rolling out of technologies, the management of economies, is based on the imperatives of private profit, economic growth, and in fact, to extents we don't fully acknowledge, military domination are what's driving the technologies and the innovation and the research around the world as things are. So that one way forward then comes out in the form of a kind of foundation myth of modernity, you could say, which is what sustainability is up against, that somehow the direction for progress is not something we should be debating with goals and metrics and indicators, because progress is what's given to us by existing systems for science and research and technology and innovation. These are the things that drive progress, according to that foundation myth. And that is something that we can't really change. It's just hardwired into the nature of technology, the nature of the world. And of course, as anthropologists know, foundation myths are often the place where you find the sources of deepest tensions. If you want to go and get a handle on what are the greatest frustrations or inequalities in a society, look at the foundation myth. And I think it's quite interesting that in globalizing modernity around the world that is being challenged by sustainability, that foundation myth is one around a hardwired one-track progress. The idea being there is no alternative. We may not like the things that are coming out in transport, materials, housing, urban development, the military, biotechnology, agriculture, medicine. We may not like some of the directions being taken, but there's nothing you can do about it because it's progress. When the Economist, again, I pick on the Economist, it's an excellent journal, but it sometimes is helpful in the way it illuminates these things. And when speaking of the 2008 financial crash and the role of new technologies for trading, rapid trading in that, the Economist said, yes, it's a big problem, but what can we do? There is no alternative. It's just like human evolution. It just unfolds. There is no room for human agency over it. And this idea about how progress is something that just unfolds from existing structures of interests in science and technology and innovation is pretty ubiquitous across some remarkably diverse political settings around the world. You see this idea in different voices of the rightful place of science driving change. Science drives social change rather than society driving science. That our hopes as societies rest on technological progress. Technology has afforded this enormous significance, and one cannot impede scientific progress. You can't stop it. You may not like it, but you can't stop it. And from that comes a language often countering the innovation discourse around the world of being pro-innovation. So when innovations are being criticized because they may have sustainability adverse effects in sustainability terms, then the counter voice from business or from industry is often, well, we're pro-innovation. We're the pro-innovation union, says the arguably the single most important plank of European Union policy at the moment. This is about being pro-innovation. It's odd, because that only makes sense if innovation is one thing. If innovation is multiple things, then the question is, well, which innovation are you pro? But that slogan implies this one-track progress. According to the British Academy of Engineering, Royal Academy of Engineering, I should say, history is a race to advance technology. The role of government is to strive to stay in the race. It's a rather modest ambition, the characteristic of the British nowadays maybe. Other countries are trying to win the race, but nonetheless, it's a race. It's a one-track race. And the role of the public, according to these kinds of authorities, is to give technology the status it deserves, to stand back, to admire, and not to interfere. And that's where we get all kinds of language around innovation is great. It's identified in different places around the world with national prowess, feelings of patriotism. And if you think I'm being a little bit glib here and picking on these political discourses, which of course are always simplistic, we know that, behind the scenes, when you look at the technical language in economics and political science, social science, behind innovation processes, the kinds of advice that is given to senior policymakers, it's in the form of technical concepts like advance, early movers, first moving, catching up, latecomers, forging ahead, falling behind. Now, all these technical terms mean very specific things, but they all have that sense of a one-track race. That's what sustainability is up against. Why should we even try to change the directions in which progress unfolds? Because it's given to us by this hardwired idea. And that means then, all across the whole range of issues that I outlined at the beginning, that sustainability tries to address, we're confronted with a massive restriction of the kinds of questions that can be asked in politics around the world. We can ask, for instance, how much should we do of this or that technology, this or that type of change that powerful interests wish to introduce? We can ask how much of it, how fast we should go, maybe how much risk we should tolerate from it. We may ask who's going to be ahead, who's behind, which part of the world is ahead or behind in some notional race. The kinds of questions that are systematically airbrushed out by that kind of language are questions about which way should we go in this sector, in the agricultural sector for sustainable food, in the energy sector for zero carbon energy, in urban development. Which way, not just how fast? What are the alternatives? What are the other ways of innovating towards sustainability that are not so obvious from these most powerful interests in each setting? Who's saying what we should do and why? These are the key questions that are being eclipsed. And these are the key challenges then of sustainability debates to address. And in the course, we go through a whole kind of ways of issues that bear on that and why tools for thinking about it and addressing some of the challenges, none of which are simple. Because the single most important fact, if you like, behind that picture in a society that prizes evidence-based policy around the world, as it does nowadays increasingly, is that it's just plain wrong. It is not the case that innovation is a one-track race. In any given setting, pharmaceuticals, vaccines, public health more generally, energy, agriculture, transport, IT, innovation in any specific setting is actually a set of branching social and technological pathways going into the future. There are a range of different possible diverging ways in which innovation could unfold. So let me illustrate that by reference to sustainable seed production. At the moment, in debates around the world about how to produce seeds more sustainably for addressing challenges of global hunger, for instance, and agricultural production as it's usually framed, we see all sorts of options coming out of advanced biotechnology, synthetic biology, gene editing, transgenics and cisgenics. There are very big differences in there between the political economic implications of different kinds of technologies, which typically don't get discussed because they're all called GM and dealt with in a sort of cartoon strip way, one way or the other. But there are big differences glossed over. But maybe more importantly than that, what tends to get sidelined are other kinds of innovation, which are shown to be very effective in different settings. I mean, industrial hybrid production of seeds, for instance, conventional is accelerating at all kinds of ways. There are ways in which biotechnology can be used to assist, marker assist breeding. There are participatory breeding techniques where farmers themselves take ownership of the process and help develop those seeds and are enabled to help develop those seeds that best fit their local settings, which after all are highly diverse. It's quite an eccentric idea to think that a single monoculture produced whatever way far away in the world might be best for any given setting where the north side or the south side of a valley, for instance, or how high you are up a hill make a big deal of difference to what really works. And open source seed production, where we're not prioritizing the exercise of intellectual property rights over seeds. Now, I'm not advocating or detracting from any of these. I'm just saying that there are a whole range of different innovation pathways. We cannot, as a society, as global societies, we cannot simultaneously optimize the innovation system, the regulatory system, the industrial infrastructures for all these at the same time. Choices are made. We narrow down the choices. There's a whole series of very powerful social processes which narrow down which pathways are actually taken. The role of expectations. If finance markets expect something to happen, that in itself is a major driver of what actually happens, because capital is cheaper if markets think it's less risky. There are processes of historical path dependence, just random history. Once you start locking into something, it's very difficult to get out of it, like the QWERTY keyboard that I'm using now. Then when power comes in, as it did with the automobile in cities around the world through the 20th century, to exclude public transport and entrench private automobile transport, then you get very powerful effects, further closing down the pathways for innovation in that case. And even where we have apparently very competitive consumer markets, which are supposed to find the best option, we find these competitive markets in audiovisual formats, in software, for instance, like I'm using now, routinely locking in to manifestly suboptimal ideas. So the idea that progress unfolds for the best, all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds, is refuted on a daily basis, no matter how you look at it. So the same is true even in energy. Even where we face arguably the most daunting single task ever faced for deliberate policymaking in human history, achieving zero carbon, we're faced with an almost embarrassing plethora of different ways in which that could, in principle, be achieved. very different kinds of renewable energy infrastructures, large and small, distributed, centralized, continental infrastructures. Nuclear power is making a very strong bid to be the way forward for that. Carbon capture and storage, radical reorganization of energy services, demand management, high-tech ocean, eco-cities. Now, the point again is, of course, in the real world, a mix will be followed, but we can't optimize our systems simultaneously for all of these. Choices are being made, but that one-track language of progress does not acknowledge that. And we see in different settings, for instance, in the countries that are very keen on keeping nuclear technologies for their military reasons, we see nuclear power treated in a very privileged way. We simply ask across the board, whether it's pharmaceuticals or public health or chemicals or energy, as in this case, the questions that regulation asks is simply, is this safe? Is this tolerable for the particular pathway that has been favored by entrenched existing interests? We look at the risks, but we only compare them with those options that are manifestly worse. So, for instance, in the case of nuclear, it's clearly better than coal or oil or gas, but there are a whole series of other options which don't so often get compared with it, which it really looks rather poor compared with. And these again, so what regulation is doing, far from regulation addressing challenges of sustainability, regulation typically across different sectors further entrenches innovation of all kinds, social and technological, into these particular pathways that are favored by the most dominant interests. Wider issues of sustainability are neglected in the governance of science, technology, and wider social innovation. And that's why innovation looks like a single track when you look back at it, because it's been narrowed down by all those forces. Now, that's a critique then of the kind of mainstream business as usual way of looking at innovation in a very general sense. Let's take a look at some of the sustainability institutions themselves, because actually many of the ways of thinking about sustainability, great strengths though they have, and we'll look at these in the course in detail, reinforce this kind of imagination of control, of the way forward, that there is somehow a planetary dashboard. So much language around sustainability is informing a planetary dashboard, like there's some kind of cockpit for the world, which is steering the world in a kind of controlling way to see sustainability then in this conventional way as the way forward. And it's very well-meaning, and there are many benefits to this, but there are also grave dangers of, again, seeing the process of social change as something that's commanded from a cockpit. We see this, for instance, for all their strengths, in thinking about sustainability around grand challenges. You may have heard of the grand challenges. We'll look at those in the courses. The energy transition, that very important word, the, appearing on the front, the Anthropocene, the transition, the nexus, the interacting nexus, ways of simplifying in the way the economists would love, because they hated the complexity of the stupid development goals, as they called them. Planetary management, where we try and get to grips with the planetary control variables. A planet is something to be controlled. And there, if you think that's a little bit esoteric, already it is the case in IPCC modeling that geoengineering, negative emissions technologies of different kinds are hardwired in the models. It's assumed that we will in fact be undertaking all kinds of more controlling approach to planetary systems, seeing the planet as something to be controlled, seeing sustainability as an agenda of control. And as part of that, then the problem then shifts from the established powerful interests and structures of privilege in the world that arguably are causing the problems of unsustainability, and turning it back on ordinary citizens and consumers, who then have to be nudged by those same powerful interests to doing the right thing. And again, you see a controlling agenda, not about democracy, but about control of people. So sustainability can become that agenda too, quite an authoritarian agenda, very like the agendas that cause the problem in the first place. And of course, that's strange, because in the real world, outside these kind of imaginations of control, there is no cockpit. There are, of course, places of great privilege, but they don't control the world. What actually is happening in the world is not control, it's mutual coordination and influence among many contending interests. And sustainability means a very different thing in that light. So in the course then, we look through in various ways, looking at different disciplinary lenses, what that might mean. how you can counter these singular controlling imaginations of patriarchy and coloniality and modernity, despite the positive sides of some of those. It doesn't have to be starry-eyed not to see that they are causing some of these downsides. So we look then at a much broader way of letting go sustainability, of respecting the origins in social movements and collective action that drove agendas in the first place, seeing processes of sustainability, of change, of transformation, more as a kind of flocking behavior that one sees in nature than as a command and control from a cockpit. And what that means then in terms of the SDGs is that over time, what they mean is each of the indicators, each of the metrics, each of the goals that they're highlighted there should be expected to show a process of ever increasing improvement for especially the world's most vulnerable and most marginal people. And it's a way of being accountable about the directions taken by progress. And often sustainability is criticized for the many compromises and undoubted constrictions and problems that exist in the Sustainable Development Goals from a more ambitious perspective. But it's worth just reflecting that even though there are 169 targets, 304 indicators, 17 goals, there is nowhere among any of these that we see the actual driving forces of change in the world as it stands. Private profit, GDP growth, military domination do not feature in any form in the SDGs. So that's really quite an ambitious and transformative agenda if it actually unfolds in the way that's promised. And this kind of idea of sustainability is reinforced. We go back into some of the history of that in the course, looking at the origins of these three pillars: social equality, human well-being, ecological integrity, all coming from different social movements around the world throughout the 20th century and before, long before, struggles against coloniality, environmental destruction, patriarchy being key in those struggles, directly leading to the Brundtland Commission in 1987 and the idea of sustainability, sustainable development being the intersection of those values, with democracy as a central part of the process for how to realize those. And that's what led on some many years later to the Sustainable Development Goals as they stand today. And in that historical perspective, something interesting crops up. Because if we look at the founding challenges, the problems, the environmental problems, for instance, of sustainability around agricultural chemicals, toxic materials like asbestos, ionizing radiation, heavy metals, carcinogens, chlorofluorocarbons, endocrine disrupting chemicals, you name it, the message is so often the same, that initially the parts of society that first spotted these problems that now are taken for granted as constituting sustainability agendas were social movements, local people, workers, consumers, people who are marginalized and most exposed to the dangers were saying this is a problem. And mainstream academia, business, government continually would say, no, this is not a problem, and denied these problems that are now taken for granted as being very serious and constituting what sustainability is about. So that's not a I told you so point. It's just to remind ourselves that those structures of privilege that currently champion this simple controlling idea of sustainability, going back in time, resisted it every step of the way. And that's not just true of the problems, it's also true of the solutions. We're now taking it for granted around the world in different ways. There may be plenty of disagreements about what forms, but ecological farming of different kinds, low input farming, renewable energy, super efficient practices in the home and in business, closed cycle production. These are the mainstays of sustainability, however one looks at it around the world. Again, each one of those was pioneered by social movements, by collective action in ways that mainstream academia, business, government thought was ridiculous and resisted very strongly at the beginning. So both the solutions and the problems for sustainability came from collective action, from this kind of flocking behavior I mentioned. And an example of that, very quickly, is wind power. It is now a massive industry around the world. It has its own problems, of course, but it is a major example of what can be achieved to shift an energy system to a more sustainable form. And yet the crucial intellectual property in current wind power designs disproportionately traces back to Denmark. Why that little European country? Well, because it was in Denmark, uniquely in the 70s and 80s, that what was found in Sweden, Germany, Japan, UK, USA to not work at all. It was concluded that wind power could not work in those nuclear powered countries. Only in Denmark, with an explicitly non-nuclear, anti-nuclear policy pioneered by activist movements, did wind power begin and start on the long process of evolving into what it is now. So this kind of politics, social movement politics, really matters for sustainability. So some of these ideas are picked up. You can check it out on the website. The STEP Centre here at Sussex, spanning IDS and SPRU and other parts of the University of Sussex, has been exploring these ideas for many years now, issuing many books on the subjects, looking at pathways to sustainability in the way I've been looking at, with a consortium of partners around the world. And many of the points that we raise in the courses that we offer on sustainability come from that experience as well as from outside it. And one of the ideas that we really look at in that program of work is methods, practical methods. It's all very well to talk in the high-blown way I've been doing so far about sustainability, but how do we actually achieve this? And how do we achieve it in research? How can even postgraduate students, research students themselves, never mind other organizations, help to change the world in this other kind of way, this more flocking behavior that I'm talking about, recognizing multiple directions? Well, there's a lot to be said about it, but just to summarize it, we look at different methods that are used in academia, that are used in public policy by business researchers, by government analysts. These can be relatively broad or narrow in the kinds of evidence they take into account, or they can have the effect of closing down or opening up in the way they speak to policy. There's many technical points can be made about this, but this general scheme applies to quantitative, expert analytic methods. It also applies to participatory, deliberative, inclusive methods. It's a framework for thinking about policy methods in general. And there are a whole series of different methods we go through and look at in the course in different ways we can apply, but we're interested in the ones over on the right-hand side, down towards the bottom, that broaden out what's taken into account and open up the kind of message given to policymaking to inform sustainability more robustly. Moving from that risk regulation picture that I showed you at the beginning, thinking about uncertainties in a deep way, because things are always far more uncertain than any interest on any side of the debate typically concede, and unpicking how different perspectives have different views legitimately of what sustainability means. Everyone has a right to say, it's just some voices get to be louder than others. So these methods that give all voices an equal standing and show how different innovation pathways for society as well as for technology look different under different views, even with their uncertainties. We show how those can be unpicked, how you can actually change politics by making use of those kinds of tools. Against that backdrop, then, we draw a contrast. It's not a hard and fast, rigid distinction, but between the kind of controlling transitions to sustainability, technocratic, expert-based, singular, hierarchical visions on the one hand, which have their place in particular settings, but they tend to be privileged. They tend to be the ones, the kinds of sustainability discourse that dominates around the world in cities, in government policy. And we contrast that with caring transformations, not transitions, but transformations, highlighting relations of care, mutualistic care for each other and for the planet. And that means a whole series of different things. One of the things it means is all kinds of different interventions can be made. You don't have to be a policymaker in the cockpit or pretending you are in order to be able to act on this. You can act in these mutualistic ways as an academic, as a citizen, as a consumer, as an activist, as well as policymakers. So policymaking is crucial, but these other areas are crucial as well to achieving, to culturing sustainability in these kinds of ways. And a key idea that crops up in that is the idea of conviviality. It goes back years to the work of Ivan Illich, and towards the end of the course, we highlight some of these ideas that are converging now with sustainability and offering these other ways of strengthening sustainability discourse, moving to greater self-realization in different settings, especially of those groups who are least powerful, and taking ideas of the pluriverse that are emerging now, that we all live in a world of many worlds. There are many worlds that we're living among, and those, as seen by the most disadvantaged people, tend to be the ones that are downtrodden most. So there are values that can be highlighted that help us resist that kind of closure of sustainability possibilities, resist the effects of patriarchy and coloniality and modernity on the directions taken by sustainability, values of humility rather than hubris, and hope rather than fear, so much of current sustainability debate is fear-driven, which is a very dangerous thing. Of diversity, not singularity. Sustainability is many different things. Let's really open up the discussion of what those are. Of mutualism, we've seen in the pandemic how mutualistic responses have been so much stronger than hierarchical ones, and yet sustainability debates, for instance, in climate change, tend to be so hierarchical. Those lessons really have to come home. Of equality, not superiority. How often do we hear of excellence and performances and parading of excellence instead of equality as a way to achieve these kinds of changes? Of precaution rather than calculation. Of flourishing rather than growth. And of care rather than control. And those are clumsy distinctions in some ways, but they're a kind of scaffolding that we explore in the courses on sustainability that we give here in Sussex as ways, routes to practical insights, practical values, practical methods that help us determine how we can build more sustainable societies around the world. So that's a horribly quick snapshot of the kinds of things we talk about. I hope it made vague sense and gave you a flavor of what we're up to. And that's what, for us, transforming sustainability is about. So I look forward to a discussion. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Thank you very much for delivering that.
Thanks, Isabel.
So really now, you're very welcome. So really now I'll open it up to questions from everyone. So feel free to write in your chat box any questions that you might have about the session. You can ask questions as well about the department, and then I'll go through those. So feel free to type those in the chat box or in the Q&A box also. We can run through those. Just while you might write any questions, I'll just introduce myself. So I am Isabel, and I'm one of the international officers at the university. Our office, there's lots of members of staff, and we're all sort of allocated to a particular geographical region. My region is Central and South Asia. So if you are from one of those countries, then I'm here to be able to help you. I'm very happy to do so. We are also joined by my colleague James. James, who looks after East Asia. Hello, James.
Hello, everybody. Massive thanks to Andy. That was incredible, and yeah, very inspirational. I think Miguel has put it rightly in the chat box there as well. But yeah, if anyone is from East Asia, so in particular the countries I look after are Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and yeah, well, anyone from that region. If you want to get in touch with me, I can certainly help you out, and yeah, look forward to having a good chat. But yeah, hand back to Isabel. Thank you.
Likewise, I should say, you know, some of the stuff I was talking about was quite highfalutin, and I'm very happy to answer questions at a much more prosaic level about the course and the people and what it actually means to be working here in Sussex with us, either on the online distance learning courses or on the on-campus courses.
Thanks, Andy. Can I just ask a question, actually? Which of the master's courses do you teach on? Do you have modules on all of the master's courses, or?
Well, I mean, I personally teach on some modules. There are actually many modules that we offer, so none of us teaches on all of them. That's one of the things we're actually, we're a very pluralistic place. So I've given you a rather particular take. There is all sorts of economics that comes in. There's all sorts of international relations, political science, lots of development studies come in, which highlight different aspects. It's not all the kind of thing that theme I was picking out in my course. There's a lot of other stuff alongside it, which we'll weave together. So I only teach on some of the modules, and you know, many like-minded and some colleagues who are not like-minded, which is something we really enjoy, that we're not only from different disciplines, we're also from different backgrounds and political persuasions as well.
So embracing lots of different opinions and approaches, and sort of really emphasising that interdisciplinary approach we see with SPRU then. That's
right, yes, and that's, you know, trying to practice what we preach, because I talk the talk there about opening up sustainability and all the things it means, but it also means opening up our own teaching practice as well to be more diverse than sometimes it actually can be in the world.
Of course. And how does that translate into the backgrounds of the students that you see? So do you have a particular background that you see or favour? Or?
Yeah, it's very diverse. So we have a lot of people coming in. We have people coming in from working in business, working in government, who come to do the course later on in their careers. We have people coming from different disciplines. Lots of people from engineering and natural science, as well as people from political science and from humanities, social science coming in. We also have people coming in from different political persuasions. We have really great debates about some of the issues I've been raising here. People coming in from business settings, working for large corporations, other people coming in from NGOs or grassroots activist groups. So the students themselves, I'm ashamed to say, as an academic, I'd love to claim that we were the main stays of this, but people learn, I suspect they learn at least as much from each other as they do from us.
No, I think that's definitely something we try and get across to students, that the experience that people bring in is just as valuable as what they're learning in the classroom and the lectures as well. So
absolutely,
yeah, that's great to hear. I think we often have on the road, I'm sure Isabel probably gets it when she's in India as much as I might get it in Japan, is a question or a worry from students about their background. So maybe we might meet an engineer, but then we might meet an economist, and there's always a sense of what can they do to prepare. So I just wondered if there was any advice or tips you'd give to listeners as what to do before coming in September.
Yes, it's a good question, because I don't want to diminish it. It's not easy. It's when we're in our, academics find all the time, we're in our disciplinary bubbles. It's more comfortable. We can take things for granted. And when you step into an interdisciplinary world, it can be challenging. So the first thing is to not be alarmed when you come up against ideas that are really quite different from the ones you took for granted. I think how to prepare is just cultivate an open mind. There's nothing about the kind of interdisciplinary work that we do in our sustainable development courses that stops you working on the things that you're interested in. It's a way of carrying those forward. So we're not trying to make anyone change. We're not trying to say you have to change your view. But what we do hope is by the end of the course, you may still be taking a particular line from a particular disciplinary standpoint, but you will be informed and enriched and hopefully strengthened by the exposure to other ways of thinking. So don't feel giddy, don't feel vertigo that somehow, oh, nothing's fixed anymore, I don't know what I'm doing, what I'm about. You can still keep with those existing pathways and commitments you've got at the beginning, but we help you to reinforce those and make yourself more effective and open-minded from that point of view. So I think the main advice would be open-minded, be open to these different influences, don't feel threatened by them.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have had a question in from Miguel. Andy, are you able to see that in the chat box about anti-scientific governments and their supporters and how it relates to?
I'm just trying to find my glasses. I wasn't.
And how, so anti-scientific governments and supporters and how that relates to technocratic predominance that you mentioned.
Yes, great, thank you. Really, really great question. That's from Miguel Silva. Thank you. Anti-scientific governments, yes. So taken in one way, what I was saying might seem to be like a sort of pluralism gone mad, that nothing's true anymore. What's true if you're taking all these different views? So my point is that science itself is about a process of skepticism, of argument, of affording equality between different individuals to be able to talk about the evidence and what experiment has shown. Science is a social movement going back hundreds of years all around the world in different settings for being more robust about knowledge. Now, in the world as it is now, under regimes like the World Trade Organization, for instance, I mentioned the risk assessment regime, the idea of evidence-based policy, sound science, science-based decisions is increasingly treating science not as a process for asking questions, but as a great big hammer to bang down authority. So science itself has become more authoritarian. The motto of the British Royal Society back in the 17th century was nullius in verba, not on authority. That was the founding sentiment of science. And yet now around the world, it's used as if it were an authority. So I think the first thing is a bit of humility on the part of science itself. Not that anything goes. Science is absolutely crucial. It's an essential part of the mix, but it never tells us what to do. This pandemic discussion of do what the science says actually is undermining not only of democracy, but of science itself, because science cannot ever tell us exactly what to do. It's crucial, it's necessary, it's not sufficient. So when we then go to these anti-science debates, we see them in a different light. I think a lot of that reaction against science is driven by science itself being too overbearing in what it tries to claim for itself. science should be much more open about uncertainties, and then less can be more. So I think part of getting around the problems of these denialists, for instance, on climate change, you ridiculously argue that climate change is not occurring, is to actually be more modest and humble in how we speak about the uncertainties associated with climate change. Yes, it's happening, but we're not so sure as we claim. So it's not quite, it's a position that's neither on one side or the other, really. Science is crucial, but it doesn't tell us what to do. Those who claim it does are just as authoritarian as those who are saying, like Trump or Bolsonaro, that they just dismiss science completely. There's a kind of different way of looking at these issues that we try and unpack in the course. I don't know if that, Miguel, makes sense to you.
Brilliant, thank you. And there is another bit of feedback, really, not a question, in the chat box, just saying the session was amazing and can't wait to engage to discuss more, pointing out a lot of the slides were counterintuitive, broadening my horizon. So
well, that's nice to hear. I hope that's not a member of my family coming in to support me. But,
yeah, and then and Miguel said, yeah, thank you very much, and that makes sense. So yeah, any more questions, now's your time to ask. Let us know if there's anything else that we can help you with whilst you're here.
I mean,
question,
oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, question about the course in SPRU. So what is the level of focus on developing countries in the course?
Yes, well, different parts of the course, there are many different modules. So all of them in some way attend to, in a balanced way, to the global issues. It's not like we're not looking at these in terms of the UK or Europe or the global north, but some modules are more southern focused than others. So the program as a whole absolutely has a commitment to look at global issues as seen from the global south. It's central to some of the points I was making, for instance, about the pluriverse and conviviality. These are ideas like sustainability itself that come out of global south, and there's a tendency to forget that sometimes. So we really prioritize that, and our colleagues, of course, not only has SPRU worked on development issues since it was founded, but IDS and global studies, all the different parts of the university campus. IDS is an institute associated with the university with an absolute impeccable track record on looking at these issues. From a development studies perspective, which of course we are also can be critical about, development studies is not the same thing as a global south perspective. So we try and make sure we maximize that balance and those different views as part of the course. And some of the modules are absolutely centered on decolonial perspectives from a global southern setting.
Okay, a few more questions coming in now. So we've had a student ask what sort of what kind of projects the programme offers to get involved.
Yes. So I guess this is a question about dissertations, is that right? Well, I'll guess that.
So yeah, I think perhaps kind of dissertations, but also any ways of getting kind of exposure, work experience. Certainly in the last session that we ran, we had a lot of questions about the benefits that students would see of the links with IDS and with global and the interdisciplinarity. So I just think if you could elaborate at all on any additional kind of extracurricular or things that students can take advantage of, that would be really useful. Thank you.
Well, yes. So there's nothing hardwired in it. The dissertations is the single most concentrated piece of work that one does towards the end of the course, and there's all kinds of opportunities to tailor that to different projects that are underway. But we don't have a set piece links to partners. We expect you to work with partners. We try and facilitate and encourage people to be able to do that as you wish. So it takes a lot of rewards for being energetic and open-minded about it. But what's going on the whole time in Sussex, on the Sussex campus, is a whole series of different really vibrant seminars, workshops, which master students are on the list of and can attend alongside the course as they wish, in IDS, in global studies, as well as in SPRU and the business school and other parts of the university, where different research projects. Sussex is a major centre of work on sustainable development, development studies generally, and one sees all kinds of projects going on there, which you can come to learn about, meet some of the people involved in. And we have every year we have people who have been on the master's courses, at least on campus, who have that chance a bit greater, but it can also extend into the online courses as well, joining in as assistants on projects. And then of course, a large number of our people, even people like me, start out in these postgraduate programs. Many years later, this is what you can end up looking like. So many of our people have come into our work in IDS, in SPRU, in global studies from the postgraduate courses we offer. So it's there, it's an opportunity, we really value it, but there's no formal set piece kind of planned stages there as part of you. It's up to you to find what suits you.
Fantastic. And one more question. What can students do to prepare for the beginning of their course? This is something that I get asked quite a lot, actually. So
yes.
Do you have any advice in that respect?
Yes. Well, I mentioned earlier about just get ready for being boggled. I don't know if that word boggled, it's an English word. It means, yikes, there's loads of stuff here I've not come across before. Whatever discipline you come from, you're going to confront a whole bunch of things in this course that hadn't really featured in your previous academic work. So be ready for that. One way of getting ready for that is take a look at the course readings that we show on the website and start looking around. You don't have to look at any particular thing, just take a look around at some of the materials. For instance, I mentioned the STEPS website in my talk. Just Google the STEPS Center, Pathways to Sustainability, and you see links to all kinds of blogs, lots and lots of blogs there. So whether it be the STEPS Center or the SSRPs, the Sussex Sustainable Research Programme, you can go from those, you can snowball out. So I would get a handle on the kinds of things going on around the course in Sussex through probably the blogs of the STEPS Center, the SSRP, and some of the departments that they lead into, SPRU itself. And then when you find something that interests you, take a look at other things by that same author. And that way, just snowball, follow a line of your own making to inform yourself about some of the things that catch your eye. And that will help you with a kind of throwing a line into it, getting a little bit of an anchor about some of the things that are going on. Yeah, I think probably blogs and the websites would be another place, actually, the Sussex Energy Group, alongside SPRU, the Sussex Energy Group, IDS, STEPS Center, Global Studies, Sussex Sustainable Research Programme. These are all places that do blogs and produce materials and have websites that make that simple to get a handle on as a student thinking about coming to Sussex.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Well, as far as I can see, that is all of the questions that we've been asked today. So I would just say thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully I'll see some of you in the Facebook Live event, which is in 1 hour's time over on the University of Sussex Instagram channel. There I'll be talking to some recent and not so recent graduates from development economics, from sustainable development across SPRU. So hopefully you can join us then and ask some of your questions. And thank you very much, Andy, for that. That was really, really interesting.
Thanks. Thanks as well. Thanks, James. And thanks everybody for spending time.
Massive thanks, Andy. Brilliant work. Thanks as well.
Cheerio then. Bye-bye. I look forward to seeing people.
Bye.
Bye.